The mare went down before I did. That's the part I keep coming back to even now, years on, when the whole thing has settled into me like a stone settles into a riverbed. Not the storm, not the woman, not the thing she said. The mare. Sweetgrass, 14 years old and steadier than most men I've known, buckling in the mud with a sound I'd never heard a horse make, and me half a mile from my own door in weather that had no business arriving in October. I'm getting ahead of myself. My grandfather used to say a man who starts his story at the worst part has nothing better to lead with, and maybe he's right. But I've found the worst part is usually where the truth lives, so I'll start there and circle back. The name's Eli Brennan. I ran a cattle operation in the high country south of the Musselshell in the Montana Territory in the years when it was still called that. 300 head in a good season, fewer in a bad one, and a stretch of land my father broke his back proving up on so I wouldn't have to. I was 34 that fall. Unmarried, which the town had opinions about. Quiet, which they had opinions about too. I keep a ledger, have kept one every day since I was 19, and not just for the cattle. I write down weather, and what the dog did, and once memorably, 3 lines about a sunset that embarrassed me so thoroughly I tore the page out. I'm not a poet. I'm a man who likes to know where things stand, and writing them down is how I find out. So here is what the ledger says for that day in my own cramped hand. Cold come early. Wind from the north all wrong. Found a woman on the Cutbank Road. That's it, that's all I wrote. As if a thing like that could be set down in 7 words and left to rest. The storm came up the way the bad ones always do out there, not as a threat but as a fact, arriving fully formed, no negotiation. I'd ridden out to check the north fence because a neighbor's boy said he'd seen a gap, and the gap was real, and I was mending it with cold fingers when the sky went the color of a bruise and the temperature dropped like the bottom had fallen out of the day. Snow, in October. Wet, heavy, mean. The kind that kills calves and old men, and anyone foolish enough to be caught between 2 places. I was foolish enough. I got Sweetgrass turned for home, and we made maybe half the distance before the wind started throwing the snow sideways. And that was when I saw the shape in the road. I took it for a downed animal first. A deer maybe struck by something. Then it moved, pulled itself up onto one arm, and the shape resolved into a person, into a woman in a dress meant for a parlor and not for this, soaked through and gray-lipped and looking up at me out of the snow with an expression I have spent the rest of my life trying to describe and never quite managing. It wasn't fear. I expected fear. It was something closer to calculation. She looked at me the way a cornered thing looks at the only door, weighing whether the door is worse than the corner. "Are you going to hurt me?" she said. Not a question, flat. Her teeth were chattering so hard the words came out in pieces. "No, ma'am," I said. "I'm going to get you out of this weather before it hurts both of us. Can you stand?" She tried. She couldn't. Her ankle had turned somewhere, or she'd been walking on it too long, and when I got down off the mare and got an arm under her she went rigid all over, every muscle locking up, and I understood slow, the way you understand a thing your whole body resists, that the rigidity wasn't the cold. It was me. It was a man's arm around her. She held herself like a person braced for a blow that had come many times before and would come again. And there was nothing I could do about that in the moment except be gentle and be quick, so I was both. That was when Sweetgrass went down. The mare had stood through worse, but the footing was gone. The road was a sheet of slick under the snow, and when I shifted the woman's weight the horse stepped wrong and her hind leg slid out from under her, and she came down hard on her side with that terrible sound. And for one black instant I thought I'd have to choose, the horse or the woman, mercy or rescue, and me with one knife and no way to do right by both. Sweetgrass got up, shaken, favoring the leg, but up. I have thanked God for fewer things more sincerely. But the leg was bad enough that I couldn't put the woman on her, which meant we walked, the 3 of us, the last quarter-mile through the dark and the snow, me half carrying a stranger who flinched every time the wind pushed us together, the horse limping behind, and all of us, I think, fairly certain we weren't going to make it. We made it. I got her inside and got the fire going, and I'll tell you the truth. I was clumsy about all of it, because I lived alone and had for years, and I didn't have the first idea how to make a frozen, frightened woman feel safe in my house. I gave her the quilt off my own bed. I put water on. I kept the table between us, because I'd seen how she flinched, and I figured the kindest thing I could do was give her room to be afraid in. She sat by the fire and shook for a long time. I let her. I tended Sweetgrass's leg out in the lean-to, wrapped it, gave her oats, told her she was the best horse in the territory, which she was, and when I came back and the woman had stopped shaking and was watching me with that same weighing look. "You didn't lock the door," she said. "No." "Why not?" I thought about it. I've never been good at fast answers. It's part of why the town thinks I'm simple. "Because if you want to leave," I said, "the snow'll stop you long before a lock would, and I'd rather you knew you could go than have you sitting there wondering." Something moved across her face. She looked away into the fire. "My name's Eli Brennan," I said. "This is my place. Nobody else lives here. There's a town 8 miles south, and when the weather breaks I'll take you wherever you want to go and ask you nothing about why you were on that road, if that's how you'd prefer it." The fire popped. Outside the wind kept up its arguing. "Wren," she said finally, "my name is Wren." It wasn't, as it turned out, but it was the name she gave me, and I called her by it for a long time before I learned the rest, and even after I knew better I never stopped thinking of her as Wren. Small and quick and watchful, a bird that had learned the world was full of cats. She stayed 3 days before she'd eat at the same table as me. I didn't push it. I set a plate at the far end and I ate at the near end, and I talked about the cattle, the weather, the dog, who was named Joseph for reasons I won't get into, and she said almost nothing. But I noticed she ate more when I was talking than when I was quiet, like the sound of my voice gave her something to hide behind. So I talked more than I had in years. I told that woman about every cow I'd ever owned. I'm not proud of how dull I was, but it worked, and dull men who work are worth more than clever ones who don't. On the 4th day the snow had melted to slush, and I went out to work and came back to find she'd cleaned the whole house. Not asked, not announced, just done it, top to bottom, every surface, the way a person cleans when their hands need something to do so their mind can rest. She was standing in the middle of it when I came in, and she looked at me with her jaw set, defiant, like she expected me to be angry. "You didn't have to do that," I said. "I know," she said. "I wanted to earn my keep, so you wouldn't." She stopped. "So I wouldn't what?" "So I wouldn't owe you anything," she said, "in some other way." I understood her then. I understood her completely, in a way that turned my stomach, and I had to be very careful with my voice when I answered, because the wrong tone would have undone all of it. "Wren," I said, "look at me." She did, barely. "You don't owe me anything, not in any way, not now, not when you leave, not ever. If you scrubbed this floor every day for a year you wouldn't owe me, and if you never lifted a finger again you wouldn't owe me either. Whatever made you think a roof comes with a price like that, it was wrong. I'm sorry it taught you that, but it's not true here." She stared at me, and then she did the thing that broke something open in me. She didn't cry, didn't soften, didn't thank me. She got angrier. Her hands curled into fists at her sides and her eyes filled, and her voice came out shaking with fury. "Don't," she said, "don't be kind. I don't know what to do with kind. I know what to do with the other thing. Kind is," she pressed the back of her wrist to her mouth. "Kind is how it starts. Kind is the worst part, because then you let your guard down and then—" She didn't finish. She didn't have to. I have thought about those words 10,000 times since. Lying awake, and every time I think about them, I want to ride south and burn down whatever house taught her that kindness was a trap. I didn't say anything else that day. I just nodded and went back outside and gave her the room to be furious in, the same way I'd given her room to be afraid. It was all I had to offer. Sometimes the most a person can do is refuse to be one more thing someone has to brace against. The story came out in pieces over the next week. The way water finds its way out of frozen ground, slow, then all at once. She'd come from a place far east of there, the daughter of a man who owned more than he loved. When she was 17, her father had arranged a marriage. That was the word she used, arranged, with a bitterness that aged her 10 years when she said it, to a man 3 times her age who'd loaned her father money and called in the debt in daughters. She'd been kept after that. Not married, not free. Kept in a house with locks on the outsides of doors, by a man who was waiting for her to break in some particular way before he'd make it official. He used to say I had to be willing, she told me one night, not looking at me, picking at a thread on the quilt. He said it had to be my choice, that was the game. He'd keep me there until I chose it, until I was so worn down I'd say yes just to make the waiting stop. He had patience, he had so much patience. Her voice cracked on that. 11 years, Eli. I gave him 11 years and I never said it. And then I ran. How'd you get out? There was a fire, she said. Not me. I want to say it was me, but it wasn't. It was the kitchen, an accident, and in the smoke nobody was watching the doors. I walked out the front and I kept walking and I got on a coach with money I'd stolen, a coin at a time over 4 years, hidden in the hem of a dress, and I rode it as far west as it went. And then I walked, and then it started snowing, and then there was a man on a horse in the road and I thought, she laughed, a small wrecked sound. I thought, of course it ends with another man on a road. Of course I don't get to just freeze in peace. I sat with that for a while. The fire was low. Joseph the dog had his head on her foot, which he'd taken to doing, and which she let him do, and I noticed she'd started letting him do it before she'd let me sit any closer than the table's far end. You're not going back, I said. It came out harder than I meant it. No, she agreed. I'd die first. I'd genuinely die first, and I've thought about it, so don't think I'm being dramatic. I don't think you're being dramatic. He'll look for me, she said. He's the kind of man who doesn't lose things. He has money and he has men and he has all the time in the world. He'll look and he'll be patient about it the way he's patient about everything. She finally looked at me. I'm telling you this so you understand what you took in off the road. I'm not a stray dog, Eli. I'm a thing somebody's hunting. You should put me on the coach and forget my face. Is that what you want? The question seemed to surprise her, as if no one had asked her what she wanted in so long that the words didn't fit any familiar shape. I don't know what I want, she said slowly. I haven't been allowed to want anything in 11 years. I think I've forgotten how. I think I might be broken in that particular place. She wiped her eyes with the heel of her hand, angry at the tears. But I'll tell you what I don't want. I don't want to get back in a coach. I don't want to walk back into a world full of men who want things from me. For 3 weeks I've slept in a house where the door isn't locked and a man hasn't touched me, and I didn't know, Eli, I didn't know it could be like this. That a person could just leave you be. I thought that was a thing they told children. I didn't know it was real. I had to look away from her then. There are some things a man can't watch directly, the way you can't look at the sun. The sight of a person discovering that ordinary decency exists at 30 years old, having survived its absence for so long, it was too much. I looked at the fire instead. You can stay, I said, as long as you want. The offer doesn't expire and it doesn't come with conditions, and I won't bring it up again so you don't have to keep refusing it. You're free here, Wren. That's all. You're just free. She didn't say anything, but that night, for the first time when I banked the fire and said good night, she said it back. I should tell you about the town, because the town matters to what comes later, and because I can't pretend I didn't know what they'd think. There were maybe 200 souls in our town, and most of them had known me my whole life, and all of them had an opinion about Eli Brennan, the quiet rancher with no wife and his nose in a ledger. When word got out that I had a woman living at my place, and word always got out in a country that small, where loneliness made everyone a watcher, the opinions arrived like weather. A man and an unmarried woman under one roof. There were words for that, and the words were ugly, and they attached themselves to her faster than to me, because that's how it works, that's how it has always worked. The woman pays for the arithmetic the man walks away from. The preacher came out to see me about it. A decent enough man named Halloran, who I think genuinely believed he was being kind. He stood in my yard with his hat in his hands and told me, gentle as he could, that people were talking, and that the Christian thing, the thing that would protect her good name, would be to marry her quick and quiet or send her on her way, and that the longer I let it sit the worse it would be for her, and didn't I care about her reputation. I told him I cared more about her than her reputation, and that I wasn't going to marry a woman to satisfy a town, and that if anybody had a problem they could bring it to me directly and leave her out of it. He left unhappy. I knew he'd be back, or someone worse would. A small town that's decided to be scandalized is a patient animal too. It can wait. And waiting, I was learning, was the weapon they used out there. Wren's keeper had waited 11 years. The town would wait as long as it took. Everyone in her life, it seemed, had infinite patience, and all of it was aimed at wearing her down. I decided, standing in that yard watching the preacher ride off, that I was going to be the one thing in her life that didn't wait, that didn't want, that just stood there, immovable, asking nothing. It was the only useful thing I'd figured out how to be. The confession, the real one, the one that gave this story its shape, came on the 11th night. I remember because I'd just written it in the ledger, day 11. W laughed today, first time. At Joseph, who fell in the trough, I'd underlined it. I'm not embarrassed to say I underlined it. The sound of her laughing had done something to me I didn't have words for and still don't, fully. It was such an unguarded sound, surprised right out of her, gone before she could call it back, and the look on her face afterward, like she'd caught herself committing a crime, was the thing that told me how far down the damage went. She'd been startled by her own joy. She'd had to remember whether she was allowed. That night we sat by the fire later than usual. Something had shifted with the laughter. The air between us was easier than it had been, and she was talking more, telling me small things, a childhood memory, a song she half remembered. And then she went quiet, and I watched her gather herself up the way she did before she said something hard, and I waited. "Eli," she said, "I have to tell you something, and I need you to not. I need you to just let me say it and not say anything kind back, because if you're kind, I'll lose my nerve." "All right." She looked at the fire. Her hands were shaking again, the old shake, and she pressed them flat against her knees to still them. "In 11 years, she said, with that man in that house, we never, I want you to understand what I'm telling you." Her chin came up, that defiant lift, daring me to flinch. "I've never been with a man, not him, not anyone. He wanted me to choose it, and I never chose it, and that was the one thing in 11 years that I got to keep that was mine. I starved and I froze and I let him take everything else, but I never gave him that, because it was the only door I could keep locked from the inside." The fire cracked. I didn't say anything, I'd promised. "And the reason I'm telling you," she went on, and now her voice was breaking, the words coming faster, "is that I've been here 11 days and I'm starting to, Eli, I'm starting to feel things I don't have any business feeling, and I don't know what's real because I've never got to find out. Because I've spent my whole adult life with my back against a wall, so I don't know if what I feel about you is real or if it's just gratitude or relief or a frightened animal getting attached to whoever stopped hitting it. I don't know, and I can't bear the thought of getting it wrong. I can't bear it. So I'm telling you the truth so that you know exactly what I am. I'm 30 years old and I've never been touched by anyone who wasn't trying to own me, and I don't know how to tell the difference between love and gratitude, and you should know that before whatever this is goes any further. Because you deserve someone whole and I am not whole. I am not whole. I'm a thing that survived, and survival isn't the same as being a person." "Stop," I said. She stopped. She'd told me not to be kind, and I wasn't going to be kind. Kind wasn't what she needed. She needed the truth, plain, the way I'd give it to anyone. "You're more whole than anybody I've ever met," I said. "Whole isn't the same as unhurt. A thing can be broken clean through and still be entirely itself. You kept one door locked for 11 years against a man with all the time in the world, and you're sitting here telling me you're not a person. I shook my head. Ren, that's the most a person thing I ever heard. That's not survival, that's a will. You've got more will than anybody I know, and you're using all of it right now to talk yourself out of letting one good thing happen to you. And I understand why I do, but I'm not going to help you do it. She was crying openly now, not hiding it. I'm not going to touch you, I said. Not now, not until you ask, and maybe not ever, and that's all right. That's completely all right, because that was never the price of this. You can stay here being free for the rest of your life, and I'll be glad of the company, and that'll be enough. But don't sit there and tell me you're not whole. You walked out of a burning house with your dignity in the hem of your dress. There's nothing broken about you that I can see. There's just somebody who got hurt, sitting by a fire, brave enough to say so. That's all I see. That's all that's there. She put her face in her hands and she wept, and I let her, and I didn't move from my end of the room, because moving was exactly the wrong thing and the hardest thing not to do. Every part of me wanted to cross that floor. I sat on my hands instead. Sometimes love is what you don't do. When she'd cried herself out, she looked up, exhausted, wrung dry, and she said the thing I think about most of all, the thing that started everything that came after. "Why are you like this?" she said. "What's wrong with you that you'd give up so much and ask for nothing?" And the truth was, I didn't fully know yet what I'd be giving up. I didn't know about the men who were already on the road. I didn't know what the town was about to do, or what the keeper's patience had been buying all those weeks, or the choice that was coming for me. The one that would cost me the land my father broke his back for, and more besides. I just knew that for the first time in my quiet, careful, ledger-keeping life, I'd found something I'd burned the whole thing down to protect. I didn't tell her that. It was too soon, and she'd told me not to be kind. So I just said, "Nothing's wrong with me, Ren. Go to sleep, you're safe, the door's unlocked." And she did. She went to sleep in a house with an open door, in a country full of patient men who wanted to own her, 8 miles from a town that had already decided what she was. I sat up the rest of the night with the ledger open and nothing written in it, listening to the wind, and I did not yet know that somewhere south of us, a man with all the time in the world had finally found out where she'd gone. I want to be clear about how it started, because it didn't start with a gun or a knock on the door or any of the things a man braces for. It started with arithmetic, the way most ruin does. I went out to move a bunch off the south pasture and the count was wrong. Not stolen, that I'd have understood, that I could have ridden after. Just wrong. 11 head short, and a gate I knew I'd latched standing open, and the tracks in the soft ground showing they'd been driven out slow and quiet by men who knew what they were doing and were in no hurry at all. No hurry. That phrase landed in my gut like a swallowed stone. I'd heard it before in Ren's voice describing the man who'd kept her. He had patience. He had so much patience. I didn't say anything to her about the cattle. I told myself it was strays, a bad latch, my own carelessness. I wrote it in the ledger plain, 11 head loose, gate open, careless, and I underlined careless the way a man underlines the lie he most wants to believe. But I'd been keeping that ledger 16 years, and the truth about a ledger is it doesn't let you lie for long. The numbers accumulate. They tell you what you won't tell yourself. A week later it was the well. Somebody had dropped something dead down it in the night, and the water came up foul, and I spent 2 days I didn't have hauling fresh from the creek while it cleared. A week after that, a section of fence I just mended was down again, cut clean, the wire curled back deliberate. By the time I understood I was being told something, the thing had already half said itself. Nobody had threatened me. Nobody had shown his face. That was the message. We can reach you. We can take from you a piece at a time, slow, for as long as it takes, and you will never see the hand that does it. It was the cruelest kind of patience, the kind that doesn't want to fight you. It just wants to outlast you. It wants you to wear down and hand over the thing it came for so it can tell itself you chose it. It had to be your choice. That was the game. I understood now why she'd said it with such bitterness. I was inside the game myself, and I'd been in it for weeks before I knew the rules. She figured it out before I told her, of course. I should have known she would. She'd spent 11 years learning to read the weather of a dangerous man, and she could feel a storm building from 100 miles off. "It's him," she said one evening. Not a question. I was at the table cleaning a rifle I hadn't cleaned in a year, and I'd been telling myself that was unrelated too. She watched me do it and she said, "It's him. He's found me." I didn't insult her by pretending. Cattle's gone short, well got fouled, fence keeps coming down. I set the rifle aside. Nobody's come to the door, nobody's said a word. "No," she said softly, "he wouldn't, that's not how he does it." She wrapped her arms around herself and I watched 11 years of fear come back into her shoulders, that old rigidity, the cornered thing stillness she'd been slowly losing. "He's not going to fight you, Eli. He's too smart and he's got too much money, and a fight is something you could win. He's going to do this instead. He's going to bleed you. A cow here, a fence there. He'll burn through everything your father built one small piece at a time. And he'll do it so slow and so quiet that the town will just think Eli Brennan's place is failing, that you're a poor manager, that you let a woman ruin you. And one day you'll be standing in an empty pasture with nothing left, and he'll send a man to say, real polite, that all of it stops the day I get back in a coach. And then it'll be my choice again." Her voice went flat and terrible. "It's always my choice. That's how he makes it mine." I sat with that. It was, I had to admit, an elegant kind of evil. He never had to be the villain. He just had to be patient enough that I became the one who handed her over, exhausted, to make the bleeding stop. And then she'd have to choose to go, to spare me, and he'd have her back with both their consciences arranged, so the fault was somehow hers and mine and never his. "I'll leave," she said. "Tonight. If I'm gone, he's got no reason to." "No, Eli." "No," I said again, and I heard the stubbornness come into my own voice, the Brennan stubbornness my father warned me about, the thing that had kept us on land smarter men had abandoned. "You're not getting in a coach. We covered that. The offer doesn't expire." I picked the rifle back up, more for something to do with my hands than anything. "He wants me to wear down. He's a patient man." "Well, I'm a patient man too, Wren. I've waited out droughts and blizzards and a bank that wanted this land more than it wanted me to have it. Patience is the only thing I'm actually good at." I looked at her. "He's going to find out he picked the wrong kind of fight. He came at me with waiting. Waiting's my whole life." She didn't smile. She looked at me with something I can only call grief for me, for what I was about to lose that she could see coming and I was too stubborn to count. "He has more than you," she said quietly. "More money, more men, more time. You'll lose, Eli, not in a fight, in the arithmetic. He'll always have more to spend than you have to lose." "Maybe," I said. "But there's one number he can't see in his arithmetic, and it's going to ruin his whole sum." "What number?" "That I don't care about the land," I said. And saying it out loud, I realized it was true, and the truth of it frightened me more than the men in the dark ever had. The town was the second front, and the town was harder because the town wasn't malicious. That's what made it worse. The keeper's men were a clean enemy. I could despise them without complication. But the town was just frightened and decent and wrong, and you can't shoot frightened decency. You can only watch at close ranks against you. It started with the store. I went in for flour, and the proprietor, a man named Dell who'd extended me credit my whole adult life without blinking, told me, apologetic, not meeting my eyes, that he'd need cash going forward. Just from me. Just for now. I understood. Word had gotten to him, somehow, the way it always did, that Eli Brennan's place was in trouble, that the cattle were vanishing and the well had gone bad, and a man whose place is failing is a man you stop extending credit to. The keeper's quiet bleeding had a second effect I hadn't counted on. It made me look like a poor risk, and a town protects itself from poor risks the same way it protects itself from scandal, by withdrawing. But it wasn't just the money. Halloran, the preacher, came again, and this time he didn't bring kindness. He brought a delegation, 3 men of the town, faces I'd known since boyhood, and they stood in my yard and told me the situation had become untenable. That was the word a man named Croft used, untenable, and I remember thinking he must have practiced it. They told me the woman was a known runaway, that there was talk she'd left a husband back east, that harboring her was bringing trouble on the whole valley, that my troubles were spilling over, that nobody felt safe with the kind of men her presence was attracting prowling the country at night. "Send her on," Croft said. "It's the only sensible thing, for her sake and for everyone's. You can't protect her, Eli. Look at your own place. You can't even protect your cattle." It was a fair point, and it landed like a slap. I had not, in fact, protected my cattle, or my well, or my fence, or my credit. Everything Croft said was true, and underneath the truth was the thing the keeper had counted on all along, that the town would do half his work for him. That decent frightened men would press me to hand her over and call it sense, call it kindness, call it the only sensible thing, and never once see that they'd become the patient man's instrument. I told them no. I told them she was free to stay as long as she liked, and that wasn't theirs to decide. Croft shook his head like I was a boy too foolish to save and said, "Then you're choosing her over all of us. You understand that's what you're doing, over your neighbors, over your own land, over your father's name." He let that sit. "He'd be ashamed, Eli. A woman you've known 2 months over everything he gave his life for. He'd be ashamed." That one I felt. I won't pretend I didn't. They rode off and I stood in the yard a long time, and I'll tell you the truth. I went and got the ledger and I opened it to the very first page, my father's page, because he'd kept it before me and I'd kept it after, 16 years of my hand following 12 of his. His writing was bigger than mine, blunter. The first entry was the day he proved up the claim. "Land is ours," it said, "free and clear. For the boy." For the boy. For me. He'd broken his back so I wouldn't have to, and I was about to let it go for a woman he'd never met. And Croft was right that he'd have been ashamed, or at least I couldn't be sure he wouldn't have been, and that uncertainty was the heaviest thing I'd carried in my whole life. I sat with the ledger open to my father's page for a long time, and then I did the thing that I think, looking back, was the real beginning of the choice. I didn't close the book. I turned forward past 16 years of weather and cattle and the day Joseph fell in the trough to the next blank page, and I wrote, "Croft says Pa would be ashamed. Maybe, but Pa proved up this land so it'd be mine to do something with, not so it'd own me. A man who can't spend the thing his father gave him on the thing his father wanted for him, a free life, never owned it at all. The land was never the inheritance. The freedom to choose was." I read it back. I didn't fully believe it yet, but I'd written it down, and the truth about a ledger is that once it's written you have to start living up to it. Wren and I stopped sleeping much after that. The bleeding got worse and faster, like the keeper had sensed the town turning and decided to press. A barn fire I caught in time, scorched but standing. A horse gone lame from a thorn worked carefully up under the shoe. A man seen at the tree line at dusk, just standing, watching, gone before I could close the distance. They never came close enough to confront. That was still the whole point. He didn't want a confrontation. A confrontation was a thing I could win, or at least lose cleanly. He wanted erosion. He wanted me to wake every morning to one more small ruin until the mornings broke me. And here is the thing I didn't expect, the thing that turned the story. It wasn't breaking me. It was making Wren brave. I watched it happen, day by day, as the threat tightened. Something in her uncoiled. The rigidity left her shoulders. She started sleeping less but moving more. She learned to load the rifle. She learned the country around the house. She walked the fence line with me and pointed out the spots a man would use for cover with an eye so sharp it frightened me. "I spent 11 years learning how a dangerous man thinks," she said when I asked her how she knew. "Turns out it's good for something." She set snares and trip lines around the approaches. She started keeping watch and shifts with me, the two of us trading the dark hours, and in the small hours she'd talk, low, telling me things she'd never told anyone, and I understood that the danger had done the one thing all my gentleness couldn't. It had given her something to fight, and fighting was a thing she knew she was good at, and being good at something was rebuilding her from the inside out. "I was never afraid of him, you know," she told me one night, the two of us sitting on the porch with the rifle across her knees watching the tree line. "That's the part people don't understand. I wasn't afraid. I was worn down. Those aren't the same. Fear is sharp, it wakes you up. Being worn down is the opposite. It's a slow going to sleep. It's a thing that takes your edges off a grain at a time until you'd agree to anything just to stop feeling the sandpaper." She turned the rifle a little, catching the moonlight on the barrel. "This is the first time in 11 years I've felt afraid instead of worn down. And I'd forgotten, Eli, I'd forgotten how alive afraid feels. He took even that from me. He took my fear and replaced it with exhaustion, because exhaustion is how he wins and you can't fight him while you're tired." She looked at me. "I'm not tired anymore." I've thought a great deal about what she said. That fear is a kind of life, and exhaustion is a kind of death, and the patient men of the world win by trading you the first for the second so slowly you don't notice the exchange. The keeper had spent his whole cruel genius on keeping her worn down, and in coming after me, in trying to bleed me out the same slow way, he'd done the one thing that brought her back to life. He'd given her a reason to be afraid, and being afraid, she discovered she still had teeth. It was the keeper's one mistake, and it was a beautiful one to watch. The reversal, the bittersweet turn that I promised myself I'd tell you straight, came on a cold, clear night in the last week of November. A man came to the door. Finally, after all the weeks of shadows and erosion, an actual man on an actual horse, riding up the lane in the open with his hands visible, which is its own kind of message in that country, "I'm not afraid of you," and stopping at a polite distance and calling out, civil as a Sunday, asking to speak with Mr. Brennan. I went out with the rifle. Wren stayed in the doorway with the other one, and I was glad of it, glad of how steady she held it. He was an older man, well-dressed, soft-spoken, with the kind of face you'd trust in an instant and the kind of eyes you'd never trust again once you'd seen them work. He was not the keeper. He was the keeper's man, a lawyer, it turned out, or something between a lawyer and a hound, and he'd come, he said, to resolve things sensibly. He used that word too, sensibly. They all used it. The whole machine ran on the word sensible, the way it ran on the word choice, sanding the cruelty down to something a decent man could agree to. He laid it out plain, polite, almost gentle. His employer, he said, bore me no ill will. His employer understood I'd acted from chivalry, a quality his employer admired. His employer was prepared to make me whole, to compensate me for every head of cattle, every day of trouble generously, more than generously, and to leave me in peace, the moment the young lady consented to return east, where her family was so terribly worried. It need only be her choice. His employer insisted on that. It had to be freely given. No one would force her. They would simply wait as long as it took for her to see sense and come home on her own. There it was, the whole game said out loud at last in a voice as smooth as cream. It has to be her choice. We'll wait as long as it takes. The patience and the consent braided together into a noose that the victim ties herself. And here is the reversal. Here is the part I have to tell you carefully, because it surprised me as much as it surprised the man on the horse. Wren stepped down off the porch. She walked out past me, into the open, into the cold, and she stood in front of that polished man. This woman who 8 weeks ago had looked up at me out of the snow weighing whether the door was worse than the corner. And she set the butt of the rifle on the ground and rested her hands on the barrel, easy, and she looked up at him and she smiled. "You can tell him I said yes," she said. I felt the bottom drop out of everything. The man on the horse smiled too, warm, relieved, reaching for papers in his coat, and I opened my mouth to, I don't know what to argue, to refuse for her, to do the one thing I'd promised myself I'd never do, which was decide her life, and Wren held up one hand, not looking at me, and I shut my mouth. "Tell him I said yes," she said again, sweet as anything. "To this, I'm never coming back. Not for cattle, not for money, not for fear, not for patience, not for any door he opens or closes from the outside. He spent 11 years waiting for my choice, and I'm going to give it to him now, free and clear, the way he always said he wanted it. My choice is no. My choice has always been no. He just never believed I'd say it where he could hear it. She leaned forward a little, and her voice didn't rise. That was the terrible part. It didn't rise at all. It dropped, soft and certain. Tell him the waiting's over. There's nothing left to wear down. He can take every cow in this valley and every fence and burn the house, and I will stand in the ashes and tell you the same thing. He never owned a single thing about me, and he spent his whole life and his whole fortune finding that out. And the funniest part, tell him this part exactly. The funniest part is that he taught me how. He taught me that you can survive anything if you just keep one door locked from the inside. And every door is locked now. Every single one. He built a woman with nothing left to take, and then he sent you all the way out here to try and take it. The man on the horse didn't smile anymore. He looked at her a long moment, and then at me, and then he did a thing I didn't expect, which was that he tipped his hat to her, not to me, and turned his horse and rode off down the lane into the dark, papers still in his coat, and we never saw him again. I should tell you that was the end of it. That's how the story would go if a man were making it up. But the truth is more complicated, and I promised you the truth. Because the man came back. Not him. The keeper's patience didn't break that easily. A thing that costs 11 years doesn't get given up in one cold conversation. But that night was the turn. That was the night Wren stopped being a thing that was hunted and started being a woman who decided to make herself too expensive to take. And the keeper, who understood arithmetic better than anyone, was about to learn what it costs to come after two people who have both, separately, decided they have nothing left to lose. What it cost me, the land, the name, the thing my father gave his life for, and one more thing besides, the heaviest thing, the choice I'd written down before I believed it, that came in the winter. That came at the end. Wren came back up onto the porch. She was shaking again, but it wasn't the old shake. It was the clean kind, the kind that comes after, when the body lets go of what the will held steady through. I took the rifle from her hands because she couldn't hold it anymore, and she let me, and that, her letting me take something from her hands, was the first time she'd allowed it. "I've never done that before," she said, and laughed, the wrecked laugh, tears on her face. Said no, out loud, where it counted. "I've never, Eli, I've been saying it in my head for 11 years, and I've never once got to say it where it counted." "How'd it feel?" I asked. She thought about it, the way I always thought about things, slow, taking it seriously. "Like being born," she said. "Like the worst, coldest, most frightening thing, and the only thing I've ever been glad of." I wrote it in the ledger that night, every word I could remember. It took 3 pages. I didn't underline any of it. Some things you don't need to mark. You know you'll never forget them anyway. But at the bottom, after all of it, I wrote one line for myself. Because the choice was coming, and I wanted it on record before it arrived. So I couldn't pretend later that I hadn't seen it coming. "Whatever it costs," I wrote, "whatever he takes, the land was never the inheritance." I closed the book. Outside the cold came down hard and clean, and somewhere south of us a patient man was deciding what to spend next, and I sat in a house with the door unlocked beside a woman who had just, for the first time in her life, chosen something out loud, and I understood that the real cost hadn't come yet, and that when it came, I would pay it gladly, and that gladness frightened me more than any man on any road ever had. The keeper didn't burn me out. I'd braced for fire all winter, checked the barn a dozen times a night, slept with my boots on, and the fire never came, and in time I understood that fire was too crude for a man like that. Fire is a thing the law can see. Fire makes a victim of you, gives you a story the town can rally around. He was smarter. What he did instead was buy my note. I should explain. The land was mine free and clear, my father's page said so, but a ranch is never really free and clear. There's always a season you have to borrow against, a winter you have to mortgage, spring to survive. I'd taken a loan against the place 2 years back to get through a die-off, the kind every rancher carries, The kind the bank holds quiet and renews each year without a thought. The keeper bought it. Bought my paper from the bank for more than it was worth, the way a rich man buys anything he wants, and one morning in February a letter came calling the whole of it due. Not in a year, not at the usual time. Now, in 30 days in full in cash I did not have and could not raise because the cattle were half gone and the credit was dry and the town had pulled back from me like a tide. It was elegant. I'll give him that to the end of my days. He never had to break a single law. He just bought the one thread the whole thing hung from and pulled it. And the message in the letter between the legal lines was the same message it had always been. All of this stops the day she gets in a coach. He'd send a man around, no doubt real polite, to mention that the note could be forgiven entire, the land restored, the trouble ended, the moment the young lady saw sense. It had to be her choice. They would wait. I read the letter twice and then I went and found Wren in the barn, where she'd taken to spending mornings with Sweetgrass, whose leg had healed crooked but sound. I gave her the letter. She read it once fast, the way she read everything dangerous, and then she set it down on the rail and she said the thing I'd been dreading since November. "I'm getting in the coach," she said. "No, Eli." She turned to me and there was no fear in her, none, just a terrible clear-eyed calm. "Listen to me. This is different. This isn't him wearing me down. This is me doing arithmetic of my own. If I go, you keep the land, your father's land, 16 years of your ledger and 12 of his. If I stay, you lose all of it, every acre, and for what? For me to be free for one more winter in a house we don't own anymore, on land that belongs to the man I ran from. That's not freedom. That's just a more expensive cage. I won't do it. I won't be the thing that takes your father's land. I'd rather go back and lock every door from the inside again than watch you lose everything for me. You said you'd die first." I said a lot of things. Her voice cracked just once, then steadied. "I'm a survivor, Eli. You told me so yourself. Survivors do the arithmetic. And the arithmetic says one of us loses everything, and it should be me, because losing everything is a thing I already know how to do. You don't. It'd kill you in a way it won't kill me. I've had practice." And here is where I made the choice. The one I'd been writing toward in the ledger for months, the one I'd put on record before I believed it. I want to set it down honestly, because it wasn't noble in the moment. It didn't feel like a man rising to anything. It felt like a man finally stopping the pretense that he had a choice at all. "Wren," I said, "what did your keeper want more than anything? What was the one thing he spent 11 years and a fortune trying to get?" She frowned. "For me to choose it, to come willingly, he wanted." "He wanted to win," I said, "not the having of you. He could have had you any time he wanted, by force. Men like that always can. He didn't want that. He wanted you to choose him. He wanted to be the kind of man who could wear a person down so complete that they'd hand themselves over and call it their own decision. That's the only thing he ever actually wanted. The win. The proof that he could do it." I picked up the letter off the rail. "And if you get in that coach now to save my land, he wins. Don't you see it? He doesn't care about the land or the cattle or the note. Those were just tools. He spent all that money to engineer one thing, a day when you choose to go back of your own free will to spare someone you love. That's the whole game. That's the only thing he's been buying. And you're about to hand it to him for the price of a quarter section of Montana dirt." She went very still. "He doesn't get to win," I said. "Not over you and not over me. The land is the price he set. So the land is the price I'll pay to make sure he loses. I'll let the note come due. I'll let him take every acre my father broke his back for. And the day he takes it, he'll have the land and he still won't have you. He'll have spent a fortune and 11 years and all his terrible patience. And at the end of it, he'll own a ranch and an empty victory. And you'll be free. And we'll be gone. And there won't be a single thing left in the whole world for him to wear down. That's how he loses. He loses by getting exactly what he paid for and finding out it was never the thing he wanted." She was crying now, but standing straight. "You'd give up your father's land to make a point, to a man you've never met." "It's not a point," I said, "and it was never my father's land, not really. I worked that out in the fall and wrote it down before I had the nerve to mean it. My father didn't break his back for the dirt. He broke it so I'd be free. For the boy, he wrote the first day on the first page. He meant the freedom, Wren. He meant a life I got to choose. A man who'd hold onto the land by handing over a free woman to a tyrant. That man never understood a thing his father gave him. I'd be keeping the gift by betraying the gift. I won't do it. I folded the letter and put it in my pocket. Let him have the land. He can't take the inheritance. The land was never the inheritance. She crossed the barn and she put her arms around me. It was the first time she'd done it. The first time in 4 months she'd closed the distance herself, reached for me instead of being reached for, touched a man because she wanted to, and not because she was bracing for what came after. She held on hard and I held her, and neither of us said anything, because there wasn't anything left to say that the holding didn't say better. We left in March, before the note came due, on the last hard cold of the winter. I sold what cattle I had left for what I could get, and I didn't fight the note. I let it stand, let it ripen, let the keeper have his foreclosure clean and legal and complete. I signed the land away to the man who held the paper, to the keeper, through 3 layers of lawyers, so the deed would land in his hands and he'd have to look at it and know what it had bought him, which was a ranch and an absence. I left the cattle, the buildings, the fences I'd mended 100 times, the well I'd cleaned. I left the linta where I'd wrapped sweetgrass's leg the first night, and the table where I'd eaten at one end for 3 days while a frightened woman ate at the other. I did not leave the ledger. I want to tell you about the ledger, because it's the last thing and it matters. 28 years of it, my father's 12 and my 16, every weather and every cow and the day Joseph fell in the trough, and the 3 pages about the night Wren said no out loud where it counted. On the last morning I sat in the empty kitchen with the wagon loaded outside, and I opened to a fresh page, the last one I'd write under that roof, and I thought a long time about what to put there. A man should mark a thing like leaving the only home he's ever had. He should find the right words. In the end I wrote, left the land today, kept the gift. Pa would understand, I think. And if he wouldn't, then he didn't understand it either, and somebody in this family ought to, finally. Then I closed the book and carried it out and put it under the wagon seat where I could reach it, and we drove off down the lane, the 2 of us and Joseph the dog and Sweetgrass tied on behind. And I did not look back at the house, and Wren did not ask me to, and that mercy, her not making me look, and not making me pretend I didn't want to, was worth more than the quarter section in the end. It was worth more than all of it. I told you her name wasn't Wren. I should give you the rest of it now, because she gave it to me, finally, on the road, somewhere past the territory line where the keeper's reach thinned out and a person could start over with their own name. Her name was Eleanor Hale. Her father had called her Nell when she was small before he sold her, and the keeper had refused to use any name at all, called her Girl, called her You for 11 years, because a thing without a name is easier to own. So when I'd found her in the snow and asked, she'd reach for the first word she could think of that was hers and nobody else's, and she'd looked at the gray bird-quick fear in her own heart and named herself after it. Wren. A small thing that survives the winter by being too quick to catch. You can call me Eleanor now, she said on the road. Or Nell, or Wren if you want. I think I'd like to be a person with more than one name. I went so long without any. I called her all 3, after that, at different times, depending. There's a freedom in a person having more names than a tyrant can keep track of. We ended up west and north, in a valley I won't name because it's ours and I've learned the value of a thing the patient men can't find. I took work first, then a small place, small, nothing like the old ranch, a few head and a garden and a roof that needed mending when we found it. It wasn't my father's land, it was just land. But it was chosen, every acre of it chosen, and I came to understand that a chosen thing sits different in a man than an inherited one. Lighter, more yours. The town here is smaller and minds its business, or maybe we just stopped explaining ourselves and people gave up asking. We're not married, and we may never be. Eleanor had a thing done to the word willing that took years to heal, and I'd sooner she never said a vow in her life than say one with the old rigidity in her shoulders. The offer doesn't expire. I told her that the first night, and I've never brought it up since. What we are doesn't have a town's word for it, and we've found we don't need the town's word. We have our own. I'll tell you one more thing, and then I'll cut myself off, because Eleanor Wren taught me that you don't have to say everything, that you can trust a person to understand the part you leave out. A year into the new place, on a summer night, she came and found me on the porch where I was writing the day's lines in the ledger, and she sat down next to me, close, the way she could sit close now without bracing, and she watched me write for a while, and then she said, quiet, "I've never been with a man." The same 6 words. The same one she'd said by the dying fire on the 11th night, a confession then, a thing said with her chin up, daring me to flinch. But she said them different this time. She said them the way you'd say the well is full or the calves came healthy, not a wound, not a dare. Just a true thing, set down between us, with all the fear gone out of it. "I know," I said. "I'm not saying it because I'm ashamed," she said. "I'm saying it because for the first time in my whole life it doesn't feel like a thing that's been taken from me, or a thing I'm hiding, or a thing a man is waiting on. It just feels like mine. A choice I get to make or not make in my own time, on my own land, in my own life. Do you understand the difference?" "I do." She leaned her head on my shoulder, and we sat there a long while in the dark, and the dogs snored and Sweetgrass moved in the corral, and I held the ledger open on my knee with nothing written in it yet. After a time she lifted her head and looked at the blank page. "What are you going to write tonight?" she asked. I thought about it the way I think about everything, slow, taking it seriously, because some entries you only get to make once. I wrote 3 words. She read them as I wrote them, and she didn't say anything, and I didn't either, and that was right, that was exactly right, because the whole long story of us had been about a woman learning she didn't owe anyone an explanation, and a man learning that the land was never the inheritance, and you don't end a story like that by spelling it out. I closed the book. The night came down clean and cold the way it does in the high country, and somewhere far to the south and east a patient man owned a ranch he'd ruined himself to buy, and we sat on a porch he'd never find, on land we'd chosen, with every door in the house standing open to the summer dark. She reached over and took my hand. She'd never have done that a year ago. She did it now like it was nothing, like it was the easiest thing in the world.